Hello, it's Pam at Quilt Beginnings in Dublin, Ohio. And today's virtual class, we're going to do it by video, and we are going to focus on this OESD pattern, which is reverse applique. So a lot of people think reverse applique, and I've never done that, what is it? So normally when we do applique, we have a background fabric, and then we put our applique piece on top of the fabric. With reverse applique, we put our background fabric under the background fabric, and then we cut away the top fabric, exposing the underneath fabric. So this is OESD's, it's a reverse applique notebook, and there are 5 different projects in there, but there are actually 10. There are 5 large, and then there's a companion. So one of the projects has little hearts, and this is for the 5x7 notebook, and this one is the accompany pattern for a 4x6. I think they're really adorable. This one is the little butterfly pattern. So again, the 5x7 and the 4x6. And we have the flower pattern. So again, the 2 sizes with it. And there's also a peacock. And the peacock is the one that we're going to do today. And I did this one on black, but I'm actually going to stitch it today on the natural cork. And then the last one is just leaves, and I don't have an example of that, but it's also in the pattern. And so when you get the pattern and you print out the instructions, and by the way, OESD has wonderful patterns in here, wonderful instructions. I'm going to show you, this is the leaf pattern. So it was just a basic leaf, and so again, it's really pretty, but I just didn't have time to stitch it out. But if you go to your page 8 and your instructions, it's going to tell you what you need. And so this would be for the large notebook, which is the 5x7, and then the small notebook is the 4x6. Also, when you bring them up on your sewing machine or embroidery machine, you're going to see that there are 10 patterns. The first 5 are the large ones, and then the second 5 are the accompany ones that are in the little 4x6 notebook. So today we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to do the large peacock as the demo. So when you pull up your design, you're going to notice this is the peacock and he's laying on his side. So if you picture this, this is actually the front of the notebook cover and this is the back. So when I first pulled it up, I was thinking, how is this going to work? Just trust the machine. The second thing is the instructions tell you to use a piece of lightweight tearaway, and I think it's all a matter of how thick your cork is. Some corks are really thick and other corks are more like fabric, and so the cork that I'm using is very thin. So I found that if I hooped one piece of medium tearaway and then floated a second piece underneath, I had a good stable notebook cover. So what I'm going to do is, when you float something, you go ahead and you hoop your hoop. So you're going to have whichever machine you have, you're going to put this one on, and then this one we're just going to tuck underneath. So the first step is to stitch a placement line, and when I stitch the placement line, it will also hold the 2 layers of stabilizer together. So I'm just going to go ahead and it is going to stitch out the placement line. Once the placement line is stitched out, we're going to take our smaller piece of fabric, and I have interfaced, and the instructions actually tell you to interface it with the SF101. So in case you've forgotten, the SF101 is a fusible interfacing. It's just a very light fusible interfacing, but it also gives this fabric some stability. Now they tell you to spray inside of your hoop. I don't like to spray inside of my hoop because if the spray gets on the hoop, it makes it rather gummy. So what I usually do, I keep just a box in my sewing room, and this way I can just place my fabric inside of here and spray it with my 505 spray. Once I've sprayed it with my spray, I'm going to lay this in the bottom half of my hoop right inside of that placement line. Now you're going to notice that it doesn't cover the whole part, but that's because the peacock is on the front half, not the back half. So in this step, we're going to add our layer of our applique for the reverse applique. Then I'm going to take my cork fabric, which I've cut, and you can see that my cork fabric is really thin, and that's why I've used 2 layers. But now I'm going to spray the back of this and place it on here. So let me go ahead and spray it. And then I'm going to place this fabric right over top of this and put it on here. Now the part that goes on this side, you don't want to use a lot of 505 and you don't want to press it down too hard because I'm actually going to cut away part of my peacock. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the tack down, and I'm just going to kind of babysit this. So as it sews, I just want to make sure that nothing gets eaten with my presser foot. So that corner's not staying down too well, so I'm just going to hold it, but don't try to beat your machine. The machine will win. And we're going to trim this a little bit, so don't be concerned if it's not exactly within those lines. And again, on this I don't like to use too much of the 505 spray because I'm going to be cutting away something inside of here. Okay, so once that's tacked in place, the next step is to do the cutaway line, which is kind of a placement line if you were doing regular applique, but in this case, it's where we're going to cut away. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this out. And this is the upper part of the peacock's body, so it's just going to do a little teardrop shape. And it's doing the triple stitch because when we cut away our fabric, we don't want to accidentally nick into that. So it's going to do my placement stitch for the upper half. And we're just about finished. After it finishes this step, we're going to do the cutaway, which if we were doing regular applique would be the stitch for the lower half. So we'll let that stitch out. This is the way it looks in the hoop. And this is my sample. So my peacock, this is the bottom half of this. So what I need to do is I need to go in here and I'm just going to take my scissors and make a little nick in there. Now remember, there's fabric under there, so you don't want to go too deep. But I'm going to just stick my scissors under, and then I want to cut around these 2 shapes. And if you notice in the sample, when you're using cork, you're going to leave just maybe an 1/8 to maybe a 1/16. So it just gives it some dimension. You don't want to cut right up to here because you don't want your cork to peel out of there. So I'm going to go ahead and trim the inside of my cork away. Okay, so you can see that I've cut away the cork and I've just left a little bit there, which kind of adds some interest when you're finished. And now I'm going to put it in my machine because the next thing we're going to do is stitch out the peacock's head and outline. So I switched my thread to purple and I'm going to make the peacock's head and outline purple. So I'm going to go ahead and let this stitch out. And it's going to do the head, and then it's going to do a little bit of an outline around the body and his feathers. Okay, so now I'm going to switch my color, and it is going to do some decorative stitch and then the little feathers on top of the peacock's head. So I'm going to make those pink. Okay, so now that his little feathers are finished on the top of his head, the next portion is going to be this little decorative stitch that's right in here. So I'm going to go ahead and switch my color and stitch that out. number 8 is we're going to stitch out this little flower here and then the inside part of this. So I'm going to go ahead and change the thread and we'll stitch that out. And then the final step is the little decorative stitch that goes inside of the applique part. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that out in orange. Here's our finished embroidery. So it's going to be like this. But now we're going to flip it over. And our larger piece of interfaced fabric is going to go on the back here. So that this doesn't move while we're doing our embroidery, I'm going to go ahead and spray the back of this with 505 and apply it to the back. So once I have this sprayed down in place, we have one more step, but I have to add my 2 pieces of cork here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place them right at the edges and I'm going to tape them down so they don't get caught. But when I apply my tape, I find it's easiest. I use 6 pieces of tape. You want to make sure they stick well. It's really hard to get them off if you put them in the corner. So if you take it straight across here and let your machine stitch over it, they come off very easily. So I'm going to go ahead and tape these in place. Okay, so I was having a little bit of trouble with my tape, but you can see, so I've got one long piece all the way across. After I have it on the embroidery arm, I like to lift my hoop up and just do a little look to make sure that my fabric is laying flat. And I can slow my machine down or stop it as it starts moving up because I don't want any of that tape or any of those flaps to get caught. Now, you may wonder why I didn't spray those down. Those are the covers that hold my notebook. So if I had sprayed them, they would have been stuck to my background fabric and I wouldn't have been able to get those notebooks in. This is a little tip that I'm going to give you and it's not in the directions. What I like to do first, I change my thread back to the color that I originally used to stitch this down. But as you know, on an embroidery machine, the nature of an embroidery machine is to suck the needle thread down to the back side of the hoop, and normally you wouldn't see that. But on these notebook covers, you will see that. So what I like to do is I go into my machine and I'm going to turn off my thread snips and my thread cuts between colors. So on an embroidery machine, the baby lock, it has end color trim and jump stitch. Depending on which machine you're on, they're going to be in different places, but it's what you would turn off if you were doing free motion quilting. Then I left a long tail on my bobbin, so I'm going to grab my needle thread, I'm going to do needle down, needle up, and I'm going to pull my bobbin thread to the top. And now when I hold both of these threads, just like on free motion quilting, now it's going to put the knot between the layers and I won't see the knot on the back of my fabric. As I get finished and it goes all the way around, on this machine my needle's going to end down. It just depends on your machine, but then you'll cut the top thread and the bottom thread. So I'm going to let this go ahead and stitch the outer boundary of the notebook. Finish, we're going to go ahead and take our tape off, and I find it's easier to pull from the inside to the out and cut the tape like this. So we're going to go ahead and remove the tape and take it out of the hoop, and then I'm going to show you the cleanest way to take away your stabilizer. So now when I take it out of the hoop, I'm going to tear away this stabilizer. But here's one of the things I found when I first did it, is when I tear away the stabilizer, we have that original stitch in there, which was our placement stitch. So when we tear away the stabilizer, it's going to tear it away right to that stitch, and you're going to be able to see the extra stabilizer that's in there. So what I have done is I tear my stabilizer down, and then I take my scissors and I cut that one little stitch. So if I cut this one little stitch away, you don't want to cut your cork, but if I cut that stitch, then it tears away my stabilizer and it tears that thread away as well. And so you don't see. So now when I pull my stabilizer away, I'm actually pulling that part out, and my stabilizer now goes into the part that you can't see. So I like to have that stabilizer totally torn away. So if you just cut that thread and then pull it away, you'll get all of your stabilizer cleanly torn away from your notebook cover. So once I have my stabilizer torn away, I'm going to take it to my cutting mat, and I'm just going to trim about 1/8 of an inch away from here, and I'm going to trim using the top as my guide. But that way I can get away all the uneven edges, all the fray part, and any shreds of stabilizer that might remain. So I'm going to go ahead and trim it. So here's my finished and trimmed notebook cover. You can see it's really cute. This one takes the 5x7 notebook, and I have looked all over for notebooks that fit this. So my favorite notebook, because in classes everybody asks me, this is just a notebook that I found at the dollar store, and it's clearly marked on there 5x7. You don't want any that have these rings here. So here's the one that I used in the smaller one, and I found this at the drugstore. This is a 4x7, or I'm sorry, the 4x6. If you're going to get a spiral bound, make sure it's the thin spiral bound. A lot of the notebooks that are 5x7 have huge spiral binding on them, and they won't fit in here. So again, I just found this at the dollar store. I'm going to open it up and tuck in one side and then the other. And you're going to notice that the pretty fabric that you used on the inside, you don't really see. So you don't have to make your fabric match. I had enough of that I could. But once I place it in here, I have a cute little notebook. So again, this is the 5x7 notebook. This would fit in my smaller one. And as a little hint here, when I went to put this in the 4x7 cover, it was a little tight. So if you notice, only about half of this is used. So what I did is I just took the front cover and the back cover, and I just snipped away a little bit with my scissors here and on the back, and it slid in very easily. So when you get ready to do this project, cork is the best thing because it has stability. And we have a bunch of cork at the store. Right now, we have the black cork with a little bit of the gold fleck in it. And we have navy. And then we have this reddish orange color that would be really pretty, I think, with the leaves. This is called red, but it's more of an orange, in my opinion. And then we just have the plain cork without the flecks in it. So here's the collection of notebooks that I've done just in a weekend's time. This is the little sample that I just did, and I hope you have fun sewing and creating. See you next time.